Ivan Milat is often synonymous with the Backpack Murders, a series of brutal killings that took place in the early 1990s in the dense forest of New South Wales. His victims were young, adventurous travelers exploring the world, only to meet an unimaginable fate. But how did a seemingly ordinary man turn into one of the country's most feared killers? How did his crimes unfold, and what finally led to his capture? Today, we'll explore all of that and more. So buckle up. It's going to be a dark, long journey. So welcome back, listeners, to Beneath the Shadows. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Travis Fenn. I am your host, as always, recording from the Shadow Realm, my office studio here in Ypsilanti. We will be unraveling some of the most harrowing mysteries, chilling murders, and disturbing disappearances from around the world on the show. So always check back, see what we're doing. Today, we're delving into the life of Ivan Milat, an infamous serial killer whose heinous acts have left an indelible mark on Australia's history. But first, let's run through the show updates really quick, very quick. Please be sure to check out the social media channels. There is Instagram and TikTok up and running, updated at least once weekly. Also, there's a Patreon page you can go over to and check that out. I'd really appreciate it. It's Beneath the Shadows on Patreon, Beneath the Shadows podcast on Instagram and TikTok. There will be additional episodes on Patreon, once every 2 weeks, so bi-weekly. A free one, a couple of free ones to start, and then they will be $3 a month after that for 2 extra episodes per month. Those episodes will be about 15 to 20 minutes long, and sometimes run a little bit longer to about the 30-minute mark. Thank you so much, again, for joining me today. It really, really means so much to me. I appreciate the fuck out of all of you. I appreciate those who have taken the time to rate or review the show. It really helps. It boosts the show up the charts, and I can't say thank you enough. So thank you for doing that. Whether you're stopping back or a first-time listener, I appreciate you all so much. Let's dive into this shit show's life, and let's pull Ivan Milat out of the shadows. To understand how Ivan Milat became a serial killer, we first need to examine his early life and the environment that shaped him. A little nature and nurture. Born on December 27th, 1944, Ivan Robert Marco Milat was one of 14 children. Ivan was the 5th born child and one of 10 brothers. 14 siblings in total, and 10 boys. Fucking crazy house. Wow, I can't even imagine fucking, 4 kids. 14? Fuck that shit. Too much testosterone, too many kids, making for a chaotic household in Guildford, New South Wales, a suburb of Sydney in Australia there. New South Wales, located in southeastern Australia, is known for its vibrant coastal cities and stunning national parks. Its capital, Sydney, is famous for landmarks like the Sydney Opera House and Harbour Bridge. Further inland, the Blue Mountains offer rugged landscapes, rainforests, and outback towns for opal mining. Known for opal mining. Hell yeah. Opals are fucking dope. Like me some stones, like me some crystals and shit. Don't believe all the gives me powers and needs to be charged and all that shit, but to have some cool-ass fucking gemstone or mineral spheres that I really, really appreciate. The coastline features expansive surfing beaches, while the Hunter Valley to the north is home to numerous wineries. His parents, Croatian immigrant and laborer Stepan Marko Stephen Milat, goes by Stephen, was born in 1902, and Margaret Elizabeth Piddleston, born in 1920, an Australian national, were strict disciplinarians. His father worked on the wharves in Sydney after migrating from Croatia after the First World War, while his devoted mother cared for the children. And yeah, you kind of have to in that sense. There's 14 of those fuckers. Definitely needs someone to watch them full time. Busy schedule. His father eventually started a tomato plantation at a family property in Moorebank, Western Sydney, where his sons were put to work. The Milat household was characterized by tough love and often violent behavior, especially from their father, who was an alcoholic that ruled the family with an iron fist. This was a family. I don't know why. Every time I go to do S's, I always get a nice whistle going, a nice. I hate it so much. This was a family where toughness was valued above all else, and weakness wasn't tolerated. Stephen's disciplinary methods were brutal. Physical punishment was his go-to response for any misbehavior or disobedience, and it was not limited to mild spanking or scolding. He was known to use belts, sticks, and even fists when he felt a child needed correction, is what this says. Motherfucker, you need to be corrected. For the Milat children, fear of their father's rage was a constant part of their life, I believe it. And for Ivan, it marked the beginning of an association between authority, violence, and control. Observing his father's dominance through violence likely instilled in him a belief that power over others came through physical strength and intimidation, a theme that would resurface in his later years. In addition to the physical abuse, Stephen's harsh nature, how about that, extended into strict rules that limited the children's freedoms. Any display of rebellion or disobedience was swiftly met with punishment. This oppressive environment, coupled with the chaotic dynamics of a large family, created an atmosphere where emotional expression was suppressed and the seeds of Ivan's future antisocial behavior were likely planted. The Milat children grew up in an isolated, rural environment where they were expected to contribute to the household from a young age, like working on the tomato plantation. As a result, Ivan, like his siblings, learned early on how to fend for themselves. But, even among his large family, Ivan stood out. He was known for his temper and his unsettling sense of detachment from the world around him. While some were playing sports or chasing childhood dreams, many of the 10 Milat boys were well known to the local police and were used to handling knives and firearms, spending their afternoons shooting at targets in their parents' yard. And Ivan developed an early taste for violence. From a young age, Ivan displayed traits that set him apart from his siblings. He was quieter and more introverted, often withdrawing into himself, which only deepened his sense of isolation. Jeez. Unlike his siblings, who sometimes found solidarity with one another, Ivan seemed to drift further into his own world. A world where he was beginning to explore a fascination with violence. Teachers and neighbors would later recall Ivan as a young boy who didn't show much emotion, remaining largely detached even in situations where others might have reacted more naturally. Ivan's detachment was coupled with early signs of manipulative behavior. He became skilled at hiding his emotions, observing others without giving away his thoughts, and he soon learned how to charm or deceive those around him when it served his interests. Manipulative for sure. This ability to mask his emotions would later enable him to approach unsuspecting victims, gaining their trust before revealing his darker side. Living in rural Australia, Ivan and his siblings spent a lot of time outdoors, often engaging in risky, reckless behavior. As he grew older, Ivan's interest in weapons intensified. He developed a fascination for knives and firearms, frequently experimenting with them whenever he had the chance. The Milat children would often roam the forest, playing unsupervised, and Ivan took advantage of this isolation to refine his skills with knives and guns. For him, These tools weren't just for hunting animals or playing around. They were symbols of power, instruments that could hurt or intimidate, just as his father had used violence to control him and his siblings. Growing up in the Milat household, it wasn't just Ivan who got in trouble. The whole family had a reputation for lawlessness. As I said, they were mostly all known with the local police, and the older Milat brothers quickly developed a reputation as troublemakers. By the time Ivan was a teenager, he and his siblings were known for petty theft, vandalism, and other minor offenses. Together, the Milat boys operated like a small gang, egging each other on, protecting one another, and testing the boundaries of what they could get away with. Among his brothers, Ivan was one of the most feared due to his growing reputation for cruelty and his skills with weapons. Unlike the others, who seemed content with minor mischief, Ivan's crimes began to take on a more sinister edge. He wasn't simply causing trouble for the thrill of it. He was testing his limits, pushing his boundaries, and finding satisfaction in acts that would inflict fear and pain. Milat's siblings recalled him exhibiting antisocial and psychopathic tendencies from a young age, such as using machetes to harm animals during their childhood. Holy fuck. Slash fucking cat with a machete. Crazy wackadoodle. Definitely a bad sign if a child, even in their teenage years when they're all fucking hormoned out and having a bad time, if they're slashing animals with machetes, you should see a therapist. They should see a therapist pretty immediately. This behavior led to his placement in a residential school at 13. By the age of 17, Ivan's record was full of incidents involving theft, breaking and entering, and reckless behavior. Law enforcement became increasingly familiar with him, though at this stage, his crimes were not serious enough to warrant harsh consequences. At 19, he was involved in a shop burglary. However, Ivan's brushes with the law seemed to just embolden him. He just wanted to do more. He wanted to go even further with it and keep pushing those fucking boundaries he's putting up for himself. He sees the boundary. He said, I'm going to get through that shit and I'm going to keep going. I'm going to break through the next one. Let's see what happens. Each encounter with the police only reinforced his belief that he was above consequences and that he could manipulate and deceive his way out of any trouble he may come into. One of the most concerning aspects of Ivan's teenage years was the seeming indifference to the harm he caused others. Neighbors would report that animals around the Milat property sometimes went missing or turned up dead, probably with machete marks all through their fucking heads and bodies and who the fuck knows what. Though no concrete evidence connected Ivan to these incidents, those who knew him sensed a strange aura around him, an absence of empathy that hinted at something darker brewing beneath the surface. Beneath the shadows. Ha. Reminds me of that Family Guy. It's like, oh, he said it! He said it! You say the name of the movie in the movie. He also showed early signs of an impulse towards dominance and control, particularly in his interactions with young women. Ivan's interactions with girls in his school and neighborhood were described as unsettling, not a good word. Not what you want to hear when you're talking about someone's interaction with the opposite sex. You're like, it was a little creepy, a little unsettling. He had an intense, unblinking stare. He's just staring into your fucking soul, just talking to you. Hi, I'm Ivan. Hi, guys, I'm Ivan. As he unblinking stare that made others uncomfortable. I believe it. And his conversations would sometimes turn aggressively personal, leaving the other person feeling violated in a non-physical but deeply unsettling way. Hey, sweet cheeks. I'm Ivan. Size of those tatas you got there. Wish I could do an Australian. Crikey. Australia. Ivan. Hey, I'm Ivan. I'm fucking terrible at Australian accents. As he grew older, Ivan became more physical in his interactions, using his strength to intimidate those he perceived as weaker. These early behaviors hinted at what psychologists would later recognize as early signs of psychopathy, a lack of empathy, a tendency towards manipulation, and a disturbing fascination with inflicting fear. Throughout his teenage years and into early adulthood, Milat's love for weapons intensified. He became particularly skilled with knives and firearms, like I had mentioned, spending hours practicing shooting and hunting in the wilderness. His relationship with the natural world, isolated, silent, and dangerous, would foreshadow the environment in which he would later hunt his human prey. However, at the time, these traits were dismissed as typical teenage rebellion or attributed to the rough environment of his upbringing. By the time Ivan reached his late teens, he dropped out of school and began drifting from one job to another. His lack of formal education limited his employment opportunities, but he managed to find work in construction and other labor-intensive fields. He worked sporadically, moving from one job to another with little commitment. His violent temper and lack of discipline made him a difficult employee, and he often clashed with other employers. Outside of work, Ivan's lifestyle was equally unstable. He began drinking heavily and experimenting with drugs, a habit that further dulled whatever remnants of empathy or moral restraint he may have had left. The Milat brothers continued to hang out as a group, reinforcing each other's delinquent behavior, but Ivan was beginning to develop interests that even his brothers found disturbing. His criminal activities became more focused on control and dominance, rather than simple mischief or thrill-seeking. This early period in Ivan Milat's life, characterized by violence, emotional isolation, and a relentless drive for control, set the stage for the horrors he would later commit. As he entered adulthood, these traits only intensified, ultimately transforming him from a troubled youth into one of Australia's most infamous serial killers. In 1964, he received an 18-month sentence, so he was, 20? An 18-month sentence for breaking and entering. Just a month after his release, he was arrested again for driving a stolen vehicle, resulting in 2 years hard labor sentence. By September of 1967, at 22, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison. By September 1967, at 22, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison for theft. So just in and out from the time he's an adult, pretty much, is just in and out of prison, in and out of jail, in and out of fucking the system. Just a bitch-ass criminal for life. Ivan Milat leaned into the criminal lifestyle, obviously. A fan of fast cars and Brial cream? I think it's Brial cream, which I think is a hair cream. A fan of fast cars and Brial cream, with a quiet charm and fastidious nature. He also was able to have Jesus Christ. That's probably the best thing about Ivan, which is the funniest part. And it's still a terrible thing. He's an asshole. A fan of fast cars and brow cream with a quiet charm and fastidious nature. He also was able to have affairs with two of his brother's girlfriends in the same time period. So between 1964 and 1967, or I guess 1970, because he was sentenced to 3 years, in that 5-6 year period, while he was mainly in jail and prison, he was able to sleep with two of his brother's girlfriends. I mean, he's got, 9 brothers, so it's less than half of them still, but he's doing something, I guess. Good for him, somewhat. While his childhood and upbringing no doubt shaped his violent tendencies, a little bit over bad nurturing on this one. Ivan Milat's descent into serial murder was also marked by something darker, an innate cruelty that seemed to lurk just beneath the surface, just beneath the shadows, so possibly rounded out by a fucked up nature since birth. What are your thoughts, though? Do you think it's more of a nature or nurture? Do both play a little bit of a factor? Do both contribute to the downfall of these horrific people? I think it's a little bit of both for sure. I think that, you're born with some tendencies and some, brain connections that may or may not be there, and some synapses that might not click quite right. But also the way that you are brought up can definitely shape and factor into how you make decisions and how you act as an adult, early teenager, adult, kid. It can shape all of it. So I think it's a little bit of both. As we will see, it wasn't until much later in his life that this darkness was fully revealed. As Ivan progressed past his late teens, his interest in crime deepened and his offenses became more serious. Moving beyond petty theft, he started engaging in elaborate break-ins and acts of property crime. Breaking and entering gave Ivan a unique thrill. Not terrible signs all over for this motherfucker. He's a terrible, horrible person. The knowledge that he could invade someone's private space, disrupt their life, and yet remain undetected. He's a fucking monster in the shadows, this crazy psychopath. I'm Ivan. Hi, I'm Ivan. Love Ivan. It's a great character. Hi, I'm Ivan. This form of trespass wasn't simply about taking valuables. It was about the violation itself, the invasion itself. It was about control and invasion, two key elements that would later be present in more of his violent acts. On April 7th, 1971, Milat abducted two young 18-year-old female hitchhikers near Liverpool railway station with a knife. He raped one of the hitchhikers before they stopped at a petrol station cafe where they managed to escape. Milat was arrested later that day and was charged with 1 count of rape and 2 counts of armed robbery. Finally, get some maybe actual fucking justice for a terrible deed he's gonna do. Maybe not. While awaiting trial, he was involved in a string of robberies with some of his brothers before faking his suicides. While awaiting trial, he's out. He's not. He's like bonded out or some shit. He was involved in a string of robberies with some of his brothers before faking his suicide by leaving his shoes at The Gap, a well-known suicide site. So it's like the equivalent of he's like left his shoes at the Golden Gate Bridge or something. Made it look like he fucking killed himself, jumped into the water. Authorities believe that during this time, Milat fled to Queensland and Victoria before flying to New Zealand, where he lived for 2 years. Damn, just dipped out. He's like, no trial for me. However, Milat is suspected of having returned surreptitiously using a fake passport and living interstate to avoid detection. So ended up returning back to New South Wales and had a fake passport issued. He was arrested in 1974 again after his mother was taken to the hospital suffering from a heart attack. And I guess good for him. He went to visit that bitch, so he got arrested when he was seen going to the hospital. But the robbery and kidnap cases against him failed at trial, which is incredible. Holy shit. He got acquitted on him. He didn't get charged with them. They failed at trial with the help of the family, Milat's family lawyer, John Marsden. John Marsden. Marsden? Yeah, Marsden. John Marsden, you're a fucking dick. This guy's a terrible, terrible dude, and even if he could have just spent a couple extra years in prison, wouldn't have changed shit with him. But maybe he wouldn't have been out to do as much shit as he did. The failure to convict Milat for these crimes emboldened him again. He said, fuck yeah, I'm invincible. I get away with this shit no matter what. Let me go and find some more hitchhikers, yeah. The sense of power he experienced from these assaults fueled his belief in his ability to dominate others. It wasn't just about physical control anymore. It was about mental and emotional terror. He's a psychopath, huge fucking psycho. For Ivan, this was the turning point. This was one of them, at least. With the legal system failing to hold him accountable, he developed a brazen confidence, one that would only grow as he continued his path of violence. By the time he entered his 40s, he had a long history of criminal activity, but had largely managed to stay out of serious trouble. Little did anyone know that he was on the brink of becoming one of Australia's most notorious killers. By the mid-1970s, Milat developed a love for the Australian wilderness. He spent significant time in the bush, hiking, camping, and exploring remote areas. To most people, the rugged, isolated landscapes of places like the Belanglo, I think it's Belanglo. Isolated landscapes of places like the Belanglo. The isolated landscapes of places like the Belanglo State Forest were simply natural wonders. But to Milat, these secluded locations represented something far darker. They were perfect places to commit crimes undetected. The wilderness offered Ivan a sense of power and freedom. It became his territory, a place where he could operate beyond the reach of the law, shielded by the dense forest and endless expanse. His familiarity with the areas provided him a significant advantage. He knew how to navigate the landscape, how to track, and more importantly, how to stay hidden. He was essentially building himself into a formidable hunter. This connection with the wilderness would eventually serve him well during his later crimes. It's not a great way to put it. It definitely served him, helped him, I guess, commit these fucking crimes, which is, terrible dude. Fucking nightmare, dude. Where he would lure his victims into secluded locations and overpower them without the fear of interference. The bush, in Ivan's mind, became an extension of his need for control. It was a place where he was the ultimate authority, a domain he controlled absolutely. As he matured, Milat also became more skilled at reading people, learning to manipulate their perceptions and emotions. This was a crucial development in his criminal progress, as it enabled him to approach people in a way that masked his dangerous intentions. He practiced appearing trustworthy, using his charm to win over strangers and even gain their sympathy. This ability to play both sides, appearing kind and helpful while hiding a violent nature, was essential to his predatory success. This manipulative skill would allow him later to lure unsuspecting victims into his car under the guise of offering a ride. Hitchhiking obviously was a common theme back in the 70s, 80s, things of that nature, maybe even the 90s, but hitchhiking was a common activity among young travelers in Australia, and Milat's friendly facade is actually the right word, was often enough to convince his victims that he was just a helpful local. Once they were in his car, however, the true Ivan Milat would emerge. The ease with which he shifted from friendly to terrifying was a hallmark of his psychopathy and a skill he honed through years of practice. By the late 1980s, Ivan had escalated from simple crimes to violent assaults and had developed an intense craving for total control. He no longer derived satisfaction from petty theft or minor acts of aggression, just escalating and escalating. He wanted to exert complete power over others in a way that had left no room for escape. For Milat, the ultimate act of control was life and death. He began to fantasize about dominating his victims entirely, turning his sadistic impulses into fully realized plans. As Australia became a more popular destination for international backpackers, a sinister idea began to shape in Milat's mind. The vast, isolated forest of New South Wales provided the perfect hunting ground for a man like Milat, someone who thrived on control, power, and violence. And it was here, in these remote wilderness areas, that would begin his reign of terror. At this point, Ivan Milat led what appeared to be a relatively stable, if not unremarkable, life. He was employed as a road worker with the Department of Main Roads in Sydney, a job that suited his physical strength and allowed him time alone in remote areas. On the surface, he was a hard-working, quiet man, one of many in a family known for its unruly behavior and brushes with the law. During this time, Milat was living with one of his brothers, and his social life was limited to family gatherings and the occasional social outing with friends. Can't imagine he had that many friends. Probably just means like his brothers and shit. However, Milat's mental state was deteriorating. His fascination with weapons, as he has always fucking had since he was a little kid, particularly knives and firearms, which he is excellent at using, grew more intense, and he continued to build his personal collection. His obsession with power and control was taking shape, and he began searching for opportunities to act out his violent fantasies. This period also marked the start of Milat's pattern of targeting young hitchhikers and backpackers. Hitchhiking was a common way for travelers to get around in Australia, and Milat saw in them the vulnerability he craved. By offering rides to these unsuspected travelers, he could create a situation of total control, isolating his victims in the vast wilderness of the Belanglo State Forest, which he knew intimately. The first murders attributed to Milat occurred in December of 1989, when he encountered two Australian travelers, Deborah Everest and James Gibson. The couple disappeared while hitchhiking from Liverpool to Albury in New South Wales. Although Milat's precise methods were unknown, the bodies of Everest and Gibson would later be found in the Belanglo State Forest in shallow graves. I also don't know if I'm saying Belanglo right. Belanglo. Belanglo. Would be found in Belanglo State Forest in shallow graves. The horrific nature of their deaths was only discovered years later when their skeletal remains were unearthed. Both victims bore signs of extreme violence, including multiple stab wounds and evidence suggesting that they had been brutally restrained before their deaths. Ties these fuckers up, tortures them a little bit, stabs them to death. Milat's choice of the Belanglo State Forest as his dumping ground was not coincidental. As a seasoned outdoorsman familiar with the terrain, he knew the forest's vastness provided the perfect cover. This choice would become a signature aspect of his crimes, adding to the difficulties police would later face in identifying a pattern among the seemingly random disappearances. Following the murders of Everest and Gibson, Milat entered a period of relative quiet, though he continued to work for the Department of Main Roads and expanded his weapon collection even further. Keep getting me more knives and guns. Need them. I need to murder with all these knives and guns. Give them to me. However, his thirst for violence had not subsided. If anything, it intensified. Yes, as they always do. You're escalating and escalating. And after that first murder, it's like fucking heroin. You want more. It was so good. It went so fucking well. It can never go bad. I can never get caught. I'm going to murder everyone. By the start of 1991, Milat's obsession with killing had reached a boiling point. In January of 1991, he encountered Simone Schmidl? In January of 1991, he encountered Simone Schmidl. It might be something else. Schmidl. She's German. A young German backpacker traveling through Australia alone. Schmidl, like Milat's previous victims, was hitchhiking when Milat offered her a ride. Simone was a young adventurous girl whose family and friends called her Simi, S-I-M-I, last seen in Liverpool west of Sydney, hitchhiking south. The confident and seasoned traveler who had seen much of the world ended her days in a lonely forest 1,000 miles away from safety and security of her home. Yeah, definitely just all fucking alone, which has to be beyond terrifying. I can't even imagine being in that situation. Or, in Ivan's case, putting someone in that situation. I really can't imagine it. In Germany, Simone's parents heard the news in the worst possible way. On the radio. Learned of their daughter's murder over the radio. Learned that she was dead over the radio. They contacted German police for confirmation, and even though Australian authorities had advised them of the discovery, the German police did not confirm the identification until more than 2 weeks after Simone's remains had been flown home and buried. So they already had her remains back. They already buried those fuckers. And then the Germans were like, yes, that's her body. Yes, yeah. There was no doubt she had fallen victim to the same killer, showing the now familiar injuries of Deborah Everest and James Gibson, so very similar injuries to those two. Simone's body was found still partially dressed, with her shirt and underclothing pushed up around her neck. A pair of green shorts hung on the pelvis with the cord ties undone. Several items of jewelry and 2 coins were found next to the body and numerous stab wounds to the upper torso. This escalation signaled a shift in Milat's behavior. He became more calculated, more methodical in how he lured his victims and concealed their remains. I don't know what was happening there. And concealed their remains. His attacks on Schmidl and his previous victims, Everest and Gibson, were not only physical but also psychological, often involving long, drawn-out periods of control and terror before the final act of murder. The savagery of these killings suggested that Milat was no longer satisfied with simply killing. He needed to dominate and utterly subjugate his victims. In late 1991, Milat claimed his next known victims, Anja Habshid and Gabor, it might be Gabor, Anja Habshid and Gabor Neusbauer, a young German couple traveling through Australia on a dream vacation. They too were hitchhiking when they encountered Milat, who offered them a ride. The couple vanished without a trace, sparking concern among family and friends. However, their remains were not found until years later, when they were discovered in Belanglo, buried in shallow graves. The discovery of Habshid and Neusbauer's bodies shocked investigators. Anja had been decapitated. Fuck. Jesus Christ. He fucking's like, yeah, I need to go even further with the violence. I am so fucking pissed at the world. Let me cut this lady's head off. An act of violence that had not been seen in Milat's earlier killings and suggested a further escalation in his cruelty. Gabor's body was riddled with bullets, fired execution style. This time finally breaking out the fucking gun. He's good with guns and knives, remember. He can do both. He's Hi, I'm Ivan. I can shoot guns and knives, and I love to murder people, so, hi, I'm Ivan. These murders marked a new level of sadism, hinting at a killer who was not only willing to kill, but was actively enjoying the infliction of terror and pain. This extreme violence, and the fact that Milat had now targeted multiple travelers, underscored his confidence in evading detection. He was escalating in both frequency and brutality, becoming increasingly bold in his actions and less concerned with hiding his sadistic impulses. In April 1992, British backpackers Joanne Walters and Carolyn, could be one or the other, Clark, met Ivan Milat while hitchhiking through New South Wales. He lured them into his vehicle under the guise of offering help and companionship, I think as he did with most of everyone. The fate of Walters and Clark was particularly brutal. Joanne was found with multiple stab wounds to her chest and back, injuries so severe that investigators concluded they were inflicted with considerable force. It takes pretty considerable force just to actually stab someone, so I believe that. Clark's body, found nearby, showed signs of prolonged torture, including multiple gunshot wounds to the head. Really likes the multiple execution-style gunshot wounds to the head. Don't know why. You need more than one, maybe two. You put multiple, you're just destroying their fucking face. The severity and cruelty of these murders would later haunt investigators, with Clark's bullet wounds suggesting that Milat had used her for target practice. Crazy. The discovery of their bodies in Belanglo State Forest once again linked this location with the pattern of brutal killings. By this time, police were beginning to suspect a serial killer might be responsible for the string of disappearances. Milat, however, felt untouchable, felt like he could not be stopped. He continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, maintaining his job, interacting with family, and appearing perfectly ordinary. Yet, he was growing bolder, and his patterns of violence were accelerating. By 1993, the New South Wales Police Force had connected the dots between the missing backpackers and the bodies discovered in Belanglo State Forest. Operation Air, an extensive task force dedicated to finding the person responsible, was launched. Police began gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing crime scene data. However, the remoteness of the crime scenes and the lack of witnesses posed significant challenges. Despite these difficulties, a breakthrough came when Paul Onions, Mr. fucking Onions, Mr. fucking make me cry every time I cut you up. If I'm telling you, if Ivan would have got him, he might have been just balling his fucking, he might not have been able to kill him. Too much waft in the air, making Milat cry, can't see right, missing all these stabs after he gets a couple in, just the onions, dude. The onions get you. Paul Onions, a British backpacker who had narrowly escaped from Milat's clutches, came forward. Onions recounted a terrifying experience from 1990 when Milat had offered him a ride before pulling a gun on him. Onions managed to escape, flagging down a passing motorist and reporting the incident to police, though at the time it hadn't been linked to any of the murders. On January 25th of 1990, Paul set out early to hitchhike, hoping for a lift southbound along the Hume Highway from Liverpool. The heat was intense as he stood on the roadside, trying to catch the attention of passing drivers. His belongings were minimal, a small pack containing a Sony Walkman, a camera, and a few pieces of clothing. He walked farther south, occasionally stopping to thumb a ride, but with no luck. At a small shopping center, he paused for a drink, seriously considering returning to his hostel, when a fit, muscular man approached him and, in a strong Australian accent, asked, "Hi, I'm Ivan. You need a lift?" I probably just sounded exactly like that, too. Paul told him where he was headed and gratefully accepted the offer. They both climbed into the man's four-wheel drive vehicle and started south. The first thing Paul noticed was the man's long, thick mustache, styled like a zapata. Interesting. I don't know what a zapata is. I'm guessing it's a type of mustache or a person with a kind of mustache. Moustache. They talked for a while, and Paul learned the man went by Bill. As they drove, Bill seemed eager to know all about him. Where are you from? When are you due back? Who knows you're here? If a stranger asks you, who knows you're here, get the fuck away from them immediately. Go as far away as you can possibly go. Sure, where are you from? How long are you here? Sure. Who knows you're here? No. Get the fuck away. What's your occupation? The questions came fast, but Bill seemed friendly enough, so Paul answered. Bill told him he worked on the roads, was of Yugoslavian descent, lived nearby in Liverpool, and was divorced. But after an hour of driving, Paul began noticing changes in Bill's demeanor. His friendly tone grew aggressive, his language turned harsh and critical, and he eventually launched into a disturbing, racist tirade. Soon after, Bill fell silent, growing morose and refusing to talk. And that's even worse. If someone picks you up from the side of the road and then refuses to talk, will not talk, just sits there in silence like a psycho with his unblinking stare, get away. Get away immediately. As fast as you possibly can. Crash that car, do some James Bond shit, hop out the window, tuck and roll, and get away from him. By mid-afternoon, as they passed the town of Mittagong, Paul's unease grew. Bill began driving erratically, frequently checking his rear-view mirror and varying his speed. Feeling drained and increasingly anxious, Paul was jolted when Bill adjusted the radio, muttering, "I think I'll pull over to grab some tapes from the back." As Bill pulled over, Paul noticed a stack of cassette tapes on the console and wondered why he would need more. When Bill stepped out, Paul instinctively opened his door to get out, but Bill's voice cut through the tension. "Get back in the car." "Get back in the car." "Hi, I'm Ivan. Get back in the car," he demanded. His tone menacing. Probably, maybe not that tone. Maybe not as menacing in that tone. Paul, not wanting to escalate the situation, complied. But as soon as they were both back in, Bill reached under his seat, pulled out a large black revolver, and pointed it at Paul. "This is a robbery," he said. Then he pulled out a length of rope, and Paul... "This is a robbery," he said. "Hi, I'm Ivan. This is a robbery." Then he pulled out a length of rope, and Paul's alarm skyrocketed. I mean, when someone pulls out a gun, already, way skyrocketed. Desperately, he tried to reason with Bill, asking, "What are you doing?" Bill answered coldly, "Shut up and put your seatbelt back on." Paul, heart pounding, made a split-second decision. Instead of obeying, he grabbed the door handle, threw it open, and leapt from the car. Behind him, he heard Bill shout, "Stop, or I'll shoot." "I'm Ivan. Hi, I'm Ivan. Stop it, or I'll shoot. Stop running. I'll shoot you. Me's be Ivan." I don't know where he's from, what kind of accent that is, or why he sounds like a little bitch, but that's Ivan for you. Paul's instinct was to run. He darted across the highway, causing cars to swerve around him. He glanced back, expecting Bill to be right behind him. But instead, Bill was leaning casually against his car, grinning. "Get back here," he called out, almost tauntingly. Paul pressed on, flagging down a van and sprinting towards the median strip. But before he could reach safety, Bill caught up and tackled him to the ground. Struggling, Paul managed to free himself and sprinted to the van, throwing himself in front of it. The driver, Joanne Barry, an area resident, braked hard as Paul frantically climbed in, yelling, "He's got a gun! Help me!" Although startled and fearing for her own safety, Joanne decided to help. Her sister and 4 children were in the van, but one look at Paul's terrified face convinced her to get him to the nearest police station. She turned the van around, noticing Bill running back to his car, possibly carrying something. She accelerated, anxious to put as much distance between them as possible. They reached the Mittagong police station, but it was closed, so they drove to the next town, Bowral. I'm going to say Bowral. Bowral, Bowral. At the police station, Paul recounted his ordeal to Constable Janet Nicholson, describing his attacker, the vehicle, and the backpack he had left behind, which contained his passport and a return ticket to England. Constable Nicholson filed a detailed report and broadcast the suspect's description, but she explained that without a license plate number, tracking the vehicle would be difficult. She provided Paul with $20, and he returned to Sydney, where he visited the British High Commission to replace his passport. A stranger in line, moved by his plight, gave him another $20, surprising him with her generosity. So he's like telling the person at the High Commission about how he lost his passport and this guy tried to rob him and kill him and whatever else. And a stranger's like, "You sound like you need $20. Here you are, sweetheart." Some nice, kind fucking lady. Weeks later, Paul decided to stay in Australia. He found a well-paying job, and soon after, his girlfriend arrived from England. She just came over. She's like, "Okay, cool, I got you. Yeah, no, just stay right there. I'll be there." Together, they traveled around the north of the country for several weeks before heading home. Back in England, however, Paul struggled to settle into normal life. The trauma lingered, leading to frequent sleep disturbances and a string of inexplainable health issues. Onion's testimony provided investigators with crucial details, including a description of Milat's appearance and vehicle. Coupled with other evidence, such as Milat's history of violent behavior and his obsession with weapons, police were able to focus on him as a primary suspect. On May 22, 1994, police conducted a raid on Milat's home, uncovering a cache of weapons, personal belongings of the victims, and other incriminating items that directly tied him to the murders. Given Ivan Milat's irregular work schedule, authorities planned to raid his home early on Sunday, May 22, 1994, targeting 6:30 a.m. Around 50 officers assembled at Campbelltown Police Station, which was midway between Liverpool and Milat's residence. The team included members of the State Protection Group, uniformed officers, and negotiators, all gathering in the early hours at 2 a.m. for final instructions. Present at the briefing alongside Detectives Clive Small and Paul Lynch was Dr. Rod Milton, who advised lead negotiator Wayne Gordon on how to approach Milat. Dr. Milton suggested a firm and assertive tone, expecting that Milat might attempt to assert control over the situation. Surveillance team had also observed that Milat's girlfriend, Shalinder Hughes, was in the house, so the plan was to encourage both to exit the premises calmly to ensure a safe arrest. By precisely 6:36 a.m., officers had taken positions around the property. Detective Gordon dialed Milat's number, and a male voice answered. When Gordon asked if he was speaking with Ivan Milat, the voice responded no. After confirming the address, Gordon identified himself and informed Milat that police surrounded the property with a warrant to search the premises in connection to an armed assault investigation. He instructed Milat and Hughes to exit the house peacefully. Milat mumbled something unintelligible and disconnected the call. After several tense minutes, there was no sign of movement. Concerned by Milat's known possession of firearms and Hughes' presence, the officers refrained from forcibly entering. Gordon called back, and Milat answered once more. When Gordon questioned why he hadn't complied, Milat replied that he thought the call was a prank. Gordon assured him it was genuine. Minutes later, the door to 22 Cinnabar Street in Eagle Vale opened, and Milat and Hughes stepped out onto the lawn, where two State Protection Group members took them into custody. A team then entered the house to ensure it was empty and secure. Once the premises were cleared, detectives began their search. Milat, now in handcuffs, was informed of his rights and notified that he would be questioned in connection with the 7 bodies found in the Belanglo State Forest. He responded, "I don't know what you're talking about." The specialized search team, led by ballistics expert Gerald Dutton and senior crime investigator Andy Gross, commenced a meticulous inspection of the 4-bedroom home. Simultaneously, other coordinated raids at properties belonging to the Milat family members, including his mother and brothers, proceeded smoothly, with police initiating searches at each home at roughly the same time. Milat's arrest marked the end of a reign of terror that had gripped Australia for years. The evidence gathered from his home was overwhelming, but Milat maintained his innocence, denying any involvement in the backpacker murders. His family was initially supportive, though they would later acknowledge the damning evidence against him. The trial of Ivan Milat began in March of 1996, when I was just a wee couple-month-old lad. Wee lad in 1996. The prosecution presented a compelling case detailing the brutal nature of each murder and Milat's calculated methods for luring his victims. They highlighted the forensic evidence, including items belonging to the victims found in Milat's possession, as well as testimonies from survivors like Paul Onions. Mr. Onions, just making the jury cry. I don't know what it is. Milat's defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and claimed he was being framed, but the jury was unconvinced. After a trial that lasted 15 weeks, so much evidence to present. 15 weeks is crazy. Ivan Milat was found guilty on 7 counts of murder on July 27, 1996. He was sentenced to 7 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. His demeanor during sentencing showed little remorse. Instead, he maintained an air of defiance, insisting he was innocent despite the overwhelming evidence. After his conviction in 1996, Milat was transferred to the Goulburn Correctional Centre in New South Wales, a maximum security prison that houses Australia's most dangerous offenders. His life in prison began with strict isolation to ensure the safety of other inmates and guards, and he was placed under constant surveillance. Despite the grim reality of his sentence, Milat exhibited no remorse for his actions. Instead, he maintained an air of defiance, denying any involvement in the murders and refusing to cooperate with authorities or admit his guilt. Milat's refusal to accept responsibility for his crimes quickly became apparent in his interactions with prison staff. He responded to his circumstances by attempting to manipulate guards, filing complaints, and subtly protesting the conditions of his imprisonment. Milat's behavior was soon recognized by prison officials, who noted his unsettling calm and complete lack of empathy for his victims. He rarely engaged with prison psychologists, avoiding any form of introspection and denying all attempts to discuss his crimes. By the late 1990s, Milat sought ways to assert control over his life within the constraints of prison. On May 16, 1997, he made an escape attempt alongside convicted drug dealer and former Sydney councillor George Savas. The plan failed, and Savas was found hanged in his cell the next day. So he couldn't escape, so he killed himself. Milat was subsequently transferred to the maximum security section at Goulburn Correctional Center. Despite his solitary confinement, Milat remained calculated in his attempts to influence his surroundings, even befriending certain prison staff and manipulating new guards who were unaware of his past behavior. Guards described his demeanor as cold and calculating, noting that he spoke with a sense of entitlement, as though he expected favorable treatment. His high level of control over his emotions further alarmed prison staff, as Milat never displayed remorse, shame, or guilt, traits that are typically expected in cases as severe as his. Milat's behavior escalated in the 2000s as he sought new methods to control his environment and resist the absolute isolation imposed upon him. In 2001, he took drastic action when he swallowed razor blades, staples, and other metal objects just for fucking who knows why. Try to kill himself, maybe? He would later continue his self-harm in 2009 when he cut off his own pinky finger. With a plastic knife. Fucking psychopath. In an attempt to send it to the High Court of Australia as a protest. Cut off his pinky finger with a plastic knife to protest his imprisonment. Psychopath. He later claimed he intended to use his severed finger as evidence to appeal his conviction. Don't, like, what? Like, I'm fucking crazy? Like, is that what you're going for? Like, I'm mentally unstable? I don't know. But authorities quickly intervened and prevented him from mailing it. This extreme act of self-harm underscored the lengths Milat would go to for attention and control and marked one of the most infamous incidents of his prison life. Yeah, I think cutting off your own finger and trying to mail it to the High Court is, be like, yeah, someone trying to fucking cutting off their finger and mailing it to the Supreme Court here. Just crazy. Crazy fucking dude. The self-mutilation did not sway the legal system, and all appeals related to his case were promptly dismissed. In subsequent years, Milat attempted other legal maneuvers, filing appeals against his conviction, arguing procedural errors and maintaining his innocence. However, the courts consistently upheld his life sentences, refusing to grant him the opportunity for retrial. These failed appeals became routine, as Milat seemed committed to leveraging any opportunity to contest his imprisonment, despite the irrefutable evidence tying him to the murders. During this time period, Milat continued to resist prison authorities. He filed numerous complaints about conditions, often focusing on minor inconveniences or restrictions placed on his environment. His lack of remorse persisted. He remained convinced of his own narrative, asserting innocence to fellow inmates, guards, and his family. Just wouldn't admit what he'd done. Had all of these victims, had all of their items, had so many different items from these victims at his house, and still doesn't want to admit it. Has a gun that matches the forensics on the couple of gunshot wounds that they had there. Has knives that match the stab wounds, has guns that match the bullet wounds. He has so much evidence against him, and he still won't admit it. As Milat aged, his health began to decline, though this did little to soften his defiance or break his self-perception as a wrongly accused man. In the early 2010s, he developed various health issues, including back pain and high blood pressure, which required medical attention. Despite these ailments, he continued to be disruptive, refusing to cooperate fully with medical personnel and attempting to dictate terms of his care. In 2011, prison officials relocated Milat to the Long Bay Correctional Complex for a brief period due to his health issues, before transferring him back to Goulburn. The transfer allowed Milat to interact with a different set of guards and inmates, but he continued to assert his dominance and manipulate those around him. His family occasionally visited him, though the support waned over the years as the reality of his crimes and lack of accountability strained those relationships. Additionally, in 2011, he began a 9-day hunger strike, refusing food for 9 days to protest his conditions. He would lose 25 kilograms, just over 55 pounds, during that time. Milat demanded items he believed he was entitled to, including a PlayStation gaming console. a request that authorities quickly denied. He went on a 9-day hunger strike, losing over 55 pounds because he thought he was entitled to a PlayStation. Fucking, good for trying. Good for him for trying, I guess. Fucking psycho. Hi, I'm Ivan. I'm gonna not eat food for 9 days, and I'm gonna lose a bunch of weight and probably feel like garbage because I want a PlayStation. Sony's the best, man. Sony. The hunger strike highlighted Milat's psychological tendencies to manipulate and control, behaviors he had exercised throughout his life. He used these tactics in prison, attempting to gain sympathy or leverage, though he was largely unsuccessful. Milat's interactions with prison psychologists remained minimal, and he continued to refuse therapy or treatment that might lead to self-reflection or accountability. His psychological profile, as assessed by prison staff, remained disturbing, with a lack of empathy, denial of guilt, and disregard for the suffering of others. In 2018, Milat's health took a significant downturn when he was diagnosed with terminal esophageal. When he was diagnosed with terminal esophageal and stomach cancer. By this time, Milat was in his early 70s, a stark contrast to the younger, physically imposing figure who had terrorized his victims decades earlier. His cancer diagnosis led to hospital visits and more frequent medical interventions. Prison officials were obligated to provide necessary care despite his life sentence. During his time in and out of medical facilities, Milat showed little change in his attitude. Even as he faced a terminal illness, he continued to assert his innocence, denying responsibility for the murders. He refused to provide any closure for the families of his victims, maintaining his stance until the end. His deteriorating condition did not prevent him from attempting small acts of rebellion, such as making unreasonable demands or refusing certain treatments to assert a semblance of control over his situation. As his condition worsened, Milat's interactions with prison staff became fewer, and he was largely confined to his cell, too weak to engage in the behavior that had previously marked his life behind bars. Despite his physical weakness, Milat's psychological profile remained largely unchanged. His refusal to admit guilt, apologize, or acknowledge the pain he had caused underscored his unrepentant nature. In May of 2019, Milat was moved to the Prince of Wales Hospital in Sydney for his final days. Recognizing that his time was limited, prison officials gave him the opportunity to admit his guilt and provide closure to the families of the victims. However, Milat refused to confess to the crimes or show any remorse. He maintained his innocence to the end, denying the murders he had been convicted of committing and leaving the families without any final acknowledgement of their suffering. On October 27, 2019, Ivan Milat died at age 74, succumbing to his illness after over 2 decades in prison. His death did not bring closure in the way many had hoped. His refusal to confess or show remorse left a lasting sense of unease. Milat's case remains a significant chapter in Australian criminal history, a harrowing reminder of the darkness some individuals carry and the devastating impact of violent crime. In the years since his death, Milat's legacy had persisted in the form of heightened public awareness and changes in policies regarding hitchhiking safety in Australia. His calculated cruelty, lack of remorse, and defiance continue to haunt the collective memory, leaving a chilling legacy as one of Australia's most unrepentant serial killers. Alrighty, so much covered, so much about this psychopath Ivan Milat. But now let's take a small but related detour to look at Ivan's great-nephew, Matthew. Matthew, born in 1993, was only a baby when Ivan got locked up, but he would often brag about his great-uncle. While Milat was in prison, his family members split on whether he was really guilty. His great-nephew, Matthew Milat, believed he was guilty. In November 2010, Matthew Milat, who was 17 at the time, and his friend Cohen Klein invited their other friend, David Ochterlony, out to celebrate his birthday. But instead of smoking marijuana, as they said they planned to do, Matthew tormented and killed David with a double-sided axe, while Klein recorded the crime on his phone. The scene of the slaying was the Belanglo State Forest. The scene of the slaying was Belanglo State Forest, the same place where Ivan Milat's victims had been found. So just another serial killer in this fucking family of crazy motherfucking psychopaths. Wow. Just craziness, man. I don't even know what to say. Okay, with Ivan the fucking Terrible taken out of the shadows. Oh, gosh. With Ivan the fucking Terrible taken out of the shadows, with his horrific crimes brought to the light, let's hop into today's main marks before we close with our final takeaways. Number 1, born on December 27th, 1994, Ivan Robert Marco Milat was one of 14 children. Ivan was the 5th child born and one of 10 brothers. Number 2, Milat's siblings recalled him exhibiting antisocial and psychopathic tendencies from a young age, such as using machetes to harm animals during their childhood. This behavior led to his placement in a residential school at 13. Number 3, on April 7th, 1971, Milat abducted 2 young 18-year-old female hitchhikers near Liverpool with a knife. He raped one of the hitchhikers before they stopped at a petrol station. Cafe where they managed to escape. Milat was arrested later that day and was charged with 1 count of rape and 2 counts of armed robbery. While awaiting trial, he was involved in a string of robberies with some of his brothers before faking his suicide by leaving his shoes at The Gap, a well-known Sydney suicide site. Authorities believe that Milat then fled to Queensland and Victoria before flying to New Zealand, where he lived for 2 years. However, Milat is suspected of having returned surreptitiously, using a fake passport, and living interstate to avoid detection. He was rearrested in 1974 after his mother was taken to the hospital suffering from a heart attack, but the robbery and kidnapping cases against him failed at trial, with the help of the Milat's family lawyer, John Marsden. Fuck you, John. The first murders, I guess John, honestly, I don't know. John, fuck you for defending this dude. John, good on you for fucking doing something to make those charges fucking fall through. So, number 4, the first murders attributed to Milat occurred in December of 1898. Yeah, way the fuck back. He was young. He was young when it happened, like negative 50 something, negative 60. The first murders attributed to Milat occurred in December of 1989 when he encountered 2 Australian travelers, Deborah Everest and James Gibson. The couple disappeared while hitchhiking from Liverpool to Albury in New South Wales. Although Milat's precise methods remain unknown, the bodies of Everest and Gibson were later found in the Belanglo State Forest in shallow graves. Number 5. By 1993, the New South Wales Police Force had connected the dots between the missing backpackers and the bodies discovered in the Belanglo State Forest. Operation Air, an extensive task force dedicated to finding the person responsible, was launched. Police began gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and analyzing crime scene data. However, the remoteness of the crime scenes and the lack of witnesses posed significant challenges. And number 6. In 2009, Ivan cut off his own finger with a plastic knife in an attempt to send it to the High Court of Australia as a protest. In 2011, he began a 9-day hunger strike, refusing food to protest. He would lose 55 pounds just over during that time. What was he protesting? Milat demanded items he believed he was entitled to, including a PlayStation gaming console. Ivan would finally die in 2019 from esophageal and stomach cancer. The story of Ivan Milat and the backpacker murders is one of the darkest chapters in Australia's criminal history, casting a long shadow over the country and forever altering the lives of countless families. Ivan Milat's life was marked by violent tendencies and a lack of empathy that began in his early years, growing through his young adulthood and ultimately manifesting in one of the most horrific killing sprees Australia has ever seen. By examining the arc of his life and crimes, it becomes clear that Milat's actions were driven by a twisted desire for control, violence, and power, ultimately leading him to prey on vulnerable young travelers. Milat's early life, shaped by a large, tumultuous family and a violent father, instilled in him an early disregard for authority and societal norms. His behavior began to escalate during his adolescence, resulting in minor criminal offenses and a fascination with weapons that would only deepen as he grew older. By the time he reached adulthood, Milat had developed a deep-seated need for dominance and control. These early behavioral signs went largely unaddressed, allowing his violent impulses to fester and grow until they would ultimately be unleashed on innocent victims. The backpacker murders began in 1989, marking a disturbing escalation in Milat's criminal behavior. Over the next 4 years, he would abduct, torture, and kill 7 young travelers, Australians, Britons, and German nationals, targeting individuals who were trusting, adventurous, and seeking new experiences in a foreign country. He preyed on hitchhikers in remote areas, offering them rides before taking them to the isolated Belanglo State Forest, a secluded location where he had full control. There, Milat subjected his victims to unimaginable terror, exercising a methodical cruelty that left each crime scene marked by his signature brand of violence. The discovery of bodies shocked the Australian public and led to one of the largest criminal investigations in the country's history. Known as Operation Air, this investigation brought together law enforcement agencies that tirelessly worked to piece together clues and establish a pattern connecting the disappearances. The chilling nature of the crimes, combined with the lack of immediate evidence, made for a long and difficult process. However, a breakthrough came when Paul Onions, a survivor of a previous encounter with Milat, came forward. His testimony, combined with evidence collected from Milat's home, including weapons, personal items belonging to the victims, and other incriminating materials, provided the foundation needed to arrest and convict Milat. Milat's trial and eventual conviction in 1996 marked a significant victory for law enforcement, but it did little to diminish the horror of his crimes. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Milat never confessed, denied any involvement, and maintained a chilling lack of remorse throughout his trial and subsequent incarceration. His lack of accountability, combined with his attempts to manipulate the legal system through appeals and even extreme actions like self-mutilation, underscored his defiance and his unrepentant nature. The impact of Milat's crimes on the families of his victims was profound and enduring. Their grief was exacerbated by his refusal to admit guilt or express remorse, robbing them of the potential for closure. For Australia as a whole, the backpacker murders shattered a sense of safety, particularly within the culture of hitchhiking and backpacking that had been a hallmark of Australian travel. His crimes led to a heightened awareness of the risks faced by travelers and a cultural shift towards safety and caution for those venturing into remote areas. The legacy of Ivan Milat and the backpacker murders persists as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the potential darkness within individuals and the devastating impact it can have on unsuspecting lives. His calculated cruelty, lack of empathy, and utter refusal to confess paint a portrait of a killer who was not only unrepentant, but chillingly indifferent to the suffering he caused. Didn't care, did not give a shit about these people, about their families, about any of the emotional burden he put on these people. His death in 2019 closed the chapter on his life, but did little to diminish the horror and pain his crimes left behind. As Australia moves forward, the case remains a grim reminder of the importance of vigilance and the ongoing efforts needed to prevent such atrocities. The families of the victims and the survivor who narrowly The families of the victims and the survivor who narrowly escaped carry the weight of his actions, a burden of grief that time has only partially healed. In the end, Ivan Milat's story serves as both a testament to the resilience of those affected and a warning of the devastation that unchecked violence and cruelty can unleash. Thank you for joining me today as we delved into the haunting story of Ivan Milat and the backpacker murders. It's a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind ordinary faces. Now, though, let's get away from Australia. Let's get away from this serial murder, and let's take a look at next week's episode. To next Sunday we go, and we will meet up with another murderer, not a serial murderer this time, and Canada. We are headed to the great Canadian land, and we are headed to Manitoba next week. Not a serial killer like I had mentioned, but a graphic and horrific tale of decapitation, cannibalism, and mental health struggles. It's a doozy of a story, and one I'm intrigued to share with you all. So buckle up. Next week will be another fucking crazy ride, just as this one has been. If you have any thoughts, questions, updates, or suggestions for future episodes, feel free to reach out on social media or through email. I'd love to hear from you all in any way possible. You can connect with the show on Instagram and TikTok at Beneath the Shadows Podcast. There is also a Gmail, Beneath the Shadows Podcast at gmail.com. Or check out the Patreon if you're interested in more content, including exclusive bi-weekly episodes that are about 20 to 30 minutes. Head over to the Patreon page. Consider supporting the show. You would be the best person in the world if I even got one person up on there. I have one free member right now, and I appreciate the fuck out of you. But if I could get a paid member on there, if I could even get someone to support the show in any way, I'd appreciate it. I'd appreciate the fuck out of you. I tried my hardest with this show, and I know it's not perfect by any means, but anyone who's been here and who's listened to the episodes, I can't express my gratitude enough. So thank you, and please take a moment to leave a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever it is, and Spotify are great places. Apple Podcasts will shoot me up the charts, so that'd be awesome. If I can start getting some, that'd be great. Downloads are also an incredible help if people download the episode. I have, this is the 11th episode. I have 2 bonuses, a third one coming out soon, and I've had about 50 downloads, so it's a little discouraging, but I know it takes some time to get into things also. So thank you for being here. Your feedback is always truly helpful and helps the podcast reach more curious minds like yours, so thank you again. Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the shadows hide more than we can ever see. Peace out, y'all. Wow, wow, wow. Wow, wow.